Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the September 9th live question and answer session for the Cameron Peak Fire. My name is Don Sanchez. I'm a Public Information Officer with Rocky Mountain Team Black, and thank you for joining us this evening. The purpose of today's informal chat is to allow you to ask questions about the Cameron Peak Fire. The way this will work, as it has in the past, is we'll get an overview from our Operations Section Chief, John Titron, from the North Zone, and we'll get an update from Brad Johnson, Operations Section Chief with the South Zone. Then we'll go into a question and answer session with our Deputy Incident Commander, Chuck Russell, for the North Zone, and Incident Commander Dave Gesser for the South Zone. We also have Sheriff Justin Smith from Larimer County Sheriff's Office, Katie Donahue with the U.S. Forest Service, and we have Darla Seidels from Rocky Mountain National Park. You can type your questions in the comment section, and we'll get to questions as they come. I'll do my best to combine questions to try to get through a lot of the questions that we've gotten today and then online as well. I will be off camera, so you won't see me. You'll hear me ask the questions, though, and then we will send the questions to our speakers. And if we get very specific questions, as questions about specific road numbers, specific houses, those kinds of things, we'll get back to you on those, and any of the other questions we don't get to, we will answer after the session is over. So at this point, I'll turn this over to our Operations Section Chief, John Titron, and Brad Johnson for updates on the North and South Zone of the fire.
Don, good evening. John Titron, Operations Section Chief. Before I start giving you an update of where we're at now, I know that the last few meetings we've had a lot more attendance than we maybe have historically. So I thought I'd back up a little bit and say where we were before we had this major wind event and explosive growth. So the Cameron Peak Fire was originated up here in the higher elevations and was in very difficult terrain, very difficult fuel types for our fire resources to work in. After taking a hard look at the ability to go direct versus indirect use equipment, where we could be successful, where we couldn't be successful, what our probabilities of success were, an indirect strategy was chosen on the fire, particularly on this north and east side, to protect the values at risk in those areas. Redfeather Lakes, Crystal Lakes, on down to up to Upper Buckhorn, Monument Gulch, and on around to the CSU campus. So those were the real emphasis areas on this strategy. And so indirect line has been constructed around the north side as well as along the Pingree Park Road up to the CSU campus. And by indirect line, we're using a lot of road systems, widening those roads using mechanized equipment, logging type equipment to thin the canopies and set that up where it can be defensible should the fire arrive, as well as an opportunity to initiate back burning should that be necessary. And so that was the strategy that was chosen. And after we've had this large wind event, a lot of those lines that we established are still in play. They are, this northern piece is still within the original primary line up here. We did get it across the line here on Pingree, but and I'll talk about what some of the future will hold for that. But a lot of this is still usable. And then as well as on around to the CSU Mountain campus, that area is still usable as well. And so all in all, we are still within, for the most part, the box where we wanted to be in the first place. Hopefully the hope was that maybe that the fire wasn't going to come quite as hard as it did, but it did come hard. And, weather is the one challenge that we can't predict. We can look at the fuels, we can look at the terrain, but the weather is always the wild card. So after we had this run, we've got some snow. So talk a little bit about the snow and where that leaves us. The fire's not out. It's also not in a place where it was a few days ago. And so we do have some opportunity here. We'll look at this. There are some areas that are likely not to come back to life on this fire based on the snow. There will be areas that probably will, particularly knowing that we are going to get warm and dry again. The snow varied, 8 to 14 inches, I think, were what some of our field reports were. 8 inches down low and 14 inches up in some of the higher country. just to give you an idea. And so that's presented us some challenges over the last couple days. The lower roads have been plowed and we were able to get open, such as the Highway 14 corridor. So our folks have been out and moving around and working in those areas. But some of the upper roads, particularly the Pingree Creek Road, has been difficult to get access up through there. A lot of trees down on top of the very slick conditions with the road. We did make access up there initially yesterday, and then had quite a few bit more folks in there today, doing some assessment and some, checking on the areas in here where we had structures, where the structure loss was. And so that has challenged us. And now we're dealing with a very different footprint of the fire. And so that's changed some things for us as well. So I'm going to talk about where we're moving now with the conditions that we have. So we've got a good opportunity with weather. We have some priority areas. Certainly this southeast corner of the fire, right here at the upper Buckhorn area is one of our very high priorities on the fire. That's a real concern because that did come out of our box. Our first option will be looking at direct attack in there to pick up what has come across the Buckhorn Road. It did come into the High Park fire scar, and we found that did not carry fire very well, and it is lighter fuels. So this snow is really gonna put the hurt to that piece of the fire. So that's good. But this piece on the south side of Buckhorn Road, real high priority, as well as the stuff up above the CSU campus that still has the ability to flank down into that area. So that's a real high priority with us right now. This corner here on Highway 14, where it didn't come down to the road, it is also a real high priority. We'll be looking at that for a direct attack option first. That's our first choice. If it's doable, that's what we'd like to do. If it's not, we're going to have to look at another option of potentially bringing that fire down and protecting the structures around Rustic and securing that corner. But the first choice is definitely a direct attack option. And our other real high priority right now is this piece up here, up around Kilpecker, north of Knickdick. We did install a closer line, the Kilpecker line as we were referring to it, and that is still viable and usable. So that's good. We have a much closer line. The fire is real close to it now. We've scouted the 103 road today, which comes down the west side of this, and we're thinking that that's going to be doable as a line. So as we have these opportunities, we're going to shrink that indirect option. We still have our contingency lines out here on Manhattan and Deadman, and even further out than that, secondary lines. But as much as we can shrink and get after this piece of fire, we're going to do that. Looked at some potential for direct up there, and that's some of those areas where from a firefighter safety standpoint, it's probably going to be too high risk. But we'll continue to evaluate that as the snow comes off and we can get folks in there to take a closer look at it. So those are kind of the real first high priorities. The other big priority we have is we did have fire come down around structures. We did lose some structures, but we have many that we saved and are still hot around them. So we have a lot of engine crews that will be in and making sure that those are secure, doing that mop up around those structures. In fact, that was going on today in some areas, particularly along the 14 corridor where the road access was much better. There was a lot of mop up going on around structures. Great time, take advantage of the snow while the soils are wet and get stuff mopped up. That's the goal. And tomorrow we'll be able to get, I think, quite a bit of our structure resources up into the Monument Gulch and Upper Buckhorn to do some of that same work and get that area mopped up and secured and ensure that any of the undamaged structures, there's no issues with those. So that'll be a real high priority tomorrow as well. And then we have some other concerns on the fire that maybe don't quite rise to that because they're high elevation. They're going to have that snow on them, so we have a little bit more time, as well as they don't quite have the fuels alignment right now, and that's some of this area down in here in Long Draw, as well as up here in the park where, we have real high values from the use side as well as the water resource side, but we have a little bit more time on that. So we're going to be focused on these other sides of the fire. We do still have folks out there looking at those and monitoring those and working on the options and the plans for those, but I think we're going to make a real aggressive effort on this northeast corner and this north side here over the next week or so. And I think the only last thing I'll touch on, we did see a number of questions on aviation, particularly air tanker use and helicopter use, and I'll address a little bit of that. Air tankers were used on the fire. Dense forest type, closed canopy forest timber is our least effective fuel type for using air tankers. It typically will burn right through a retardant line, and they did use the air tankers early on up on this side of the fire, and that's exactly what happened. The fire burns right through the retardant line. And so, and that's because it gets caught up in the canopy as it falls to the ground, and it doesn't make it to the forest floor where we need the retardant. And so a way to combat that is to deliver retardant by helicopter. And so we did get a retardant base set up to do just that. Unfortunately, once that was inserted and set up, that's when the winds came up and numerous attempts to use the aircraft to do that work, and just was not safe operating conditions for those helicopters. We do still have quite a number of aircraft assigned to the incident, type 1 and type 2 helicopters, some type 3 helicopters, and we'll be using those as the fuels dry out to support these crews, particularly around structures and anywhere our crews are working on direct attack lines. We'll have aviation supporting them. And I think I will leave it at that. So I will pass it back to you, Don.
So next, we're going to go down to the South Zone to Rocky Mountain National Park, and we're going to hear from Brad Johnson, the Operations Section Chief for the Southwest Incident Management Team 3, working on the South Zone.
Hey all, I'm Brad Johnson with Southwest Area Team 3. I'm the operations down here. To give a little history, I did show up on Sunday with our incident management team while they were getting checked in down with Loveland. I came up here independently and tied in with all of our local partners, including the Rocky Mountain National Park, the fire management officer for the Rocky Mountain National Park, as well as the Estes Park Fire Chief, Larimer County Sheriffs. And what we were doing is that day, I showed up that afternoon, is that we were looking at this progression coming down Poudre River and as well into Hague Creek out there. So what I saw and everything else it was doing, it was moving, wind driven with that wind event that we had on Sunday, and it was moving through Hague Creek, and basically it took out that whole bowl of the creek. But on the outside of this were Mummy Passes, through Mummy Peak, Fairchild Mountain, Mummy Mountain's out here. It held up and it stopped out here in the tundra. So it did not burn through the tundra. It's hung up there and looking pretty good. And so moving on around, when you get into Chapin Pass and Chapin Pass out here, there is a lot of fuel right here, and it is basically all the bark beetle killed lodgepole pine and a ton of spruce intermixed. There is no burn scar history in there, and it's very thick, very inaccessible. And so what's going to happen in the future that, once everything dries out, it may be just chunking and flanking away really slowly on down there. It needs a north wind. But at looking with our SOPL, we call it, our situational operational planner, they were giving us predictions of the winds coming from the north for the next 3 months, and he gave it at a 2%. So hopefully this thing just keeps on getting those west winds, chunking around and we get some more weather. But other than that, sticking firefighters in there is very dangerous, very risky. There's no way to get them out if anybody gets hurt. And it's very treacherous. There's no escape zones to get anybody out if the fire gets active. So we're going to be monitoring that. And in the meantime, we are setting up basically some kind of trigger points. And this is down the road, so I just want to let everybody know. So we're setting up some kind of trigger points at Chapin Pass, just in case it does get established in Fall River. And we have other trigger points. And been working with Estes, the Estes Park Fire Department, and as well as the National Park on all the situations that come on through here, if Estes Valley if ever it does become into play. So moving on into there, let me rephrase everything. All the work that we're doing right now, with all the excellent work that the black team has been doing up here and everything else, we are pretty much contingency, I want to say. So we're basically coming up with all the plans if the worst case scenario comes up. So hopefully that scenario never does come up, but we're making sure that the plan is in place and that we're aware of everything. So that's what we pretty much started on Sunday. So moving on into Monday, when I'm sure questions will come up on Glen Haven on why we put them in voluntary evacuation, we have to realize that those big west winds were coming out, just shooting this fire west, and as the night was coming, we all had that northerly cold front come on in, and we were getting really cautious with those northern winds coming on in really fast and aggressively. And so you never know, when Glen Haven's only 7 miles away from this head of the fire and they're doing evacuations up there and everything's happening up there, we had to make sure that we're aware and let the community know that we're aware of what's going on there. And so we actually on Monday had divisions inserted in Estes Park, in Glen Haven, and over in Storm Mountain, assessing the whole area to look at all the values at risk. And so we did put them on voluntary evacuation, and I'm glad that worked out okay with everybody, and everybody just understood that we're aware of that potential. Right now, of course, the snow is in play, and hopefully everybody gets around this. We'll see, it's going to be a lot of work that's going to be put in for the next couple of weeks to make that happen. So moving on into Estes Park, like I said, we've been working with the local police department, the fire department, getting a lot of their expertise on how to assess this area and identify all the values at risk and come up with a plan in conjunction with the park on how to approach this if fire ever makes them want to make a run in here, and as well into the future if we ever do have fires in the future out here. And so moving on over into Glen Haven, the same stuff is going on over in there. We are working with the local fire department there. We are working with the sheriff there, getting a lay of the land, identifying all the values at risk, and setting up potential control locations for around all these values at risk. And the same things are going on in Storm Mountain too. And so everything, a lot of stuff has been identified so far. I really do appreciate the cooperation with all our partners that we've established here. And you guys, everybody will see a lot more resources coming in. They probably have been seeing a lot more resources coming in. And then basically, once we can access a lot of these treacherous roads in the Glen Haven area, once we can access up in here and keep on assessing this area, weather conditions permit, we will. But right now, there's a lot of roads are icy to get into that country. And the locals here know Glen Haven is really tight, compact box canyons in there, and sending fire engines down there in icy, slicky roads, it's not going to work out right now. So for the next couple of days when things thaw, you'll see some more people starting to poke on in there and start developing those contingency plans. So thank you.
Okay, the first question that we have is for Sheriff, and we have, can you tell me about structures damaged or lost? Do we know how many and where? And can you tell us about the structure assessment?
Very good question. Let me actually start with the structure assessment. We have damage assessment teams that are put together right now who will go out and make those assessments. What we have for information right now is there are two areas where there is known structure damage. One is the Poudre Canyon from Rustic and above. And we don't have things verified. However, it's my understanding what we have for damaged or destroyed structures, I'll simply say could be counted on one hand. I think it's a very low number. Obviously, it's a tragedy for anyone who lost or had damaged property. What we're going to be able to do is get the damage assessment teams in. The schedule is for them to get in tomorrow about 8 o'clock, so first thing in the morning, be able to work the canyon. One of the reasons it takes longer is while we have some known areas that we believe there was structure damage, they want to be very thorough and go all the way through the canyon and be able to answer those questions. So they're going to get through tomorrow. It took a little bit of work to make sure we could get power lines cleaned up, et cetera. Expect that to be completed tomorrow, and then we'll be able to move on to those notifications. Then the second area that we know there to be damaged that we're going to be sending teams into is the Monument Gulch area. Obviously, I think everybody out there is aware, since that's where the fire jumped across the Pingree Park Road, that's an area that did get hit heavily, unfortunately. The challenges there also include a lot of downed trees, and that's pretty rough road getting up in there. And there's a lot of rocks that are rolling. As people have witnessed before, after you have fire, that breaks loose a lot of the soil and rocks. So they have a combination of dealing with power issues up there, just general road conditions from the snow, combined with being able to get the trees and boulders out of the road. So what I understand is they're looking at Friday to start those assessments. They're not sure if they can complete that area in one day. And what you have to understand, it's not as simple as being in town where you have known lots along a street. A lot of times those areas, they can be, a little hard to tell where the addresses were. So those teams will be working with maps from the assessor's office, GPS, et cetera, to go through, document each property and be able to clearly know where that's at. We have been in touch with some folks with the HOA up in Monument Gulch. I understand we're providing us additional information on contact with residents. So that's how we're going to get those assessments done. Again, start on Friday for Monument Gulch. At least that's the schedule currently. And it may be into Saturday on that. And now as far as how property owners will be notified, our plan, and we worked on this to figure out, depending on the area, anywhere along the Highway 14 Poudre Canyon corridor is within the fire district of Poudre Canyon Fire. So I had a communication with Chief Collins today with Poudre Canyon Fire, and our intention is to work with them to help make those notifications. We want to follow up the notification of damaged or destroyed property with references to where homeowners or property owners can get assistance and what's there through the emergency management folks and what resources they have available. So that's how we're going to handle Poudre Canyon is the plan. And then as we get to Monument Gulch, because that's not within a fire district, that will fall back onto the sheriff's office. So our plan with that is once we get that verified and we get the contacts, is we want to reach out individually to property owners up there. And again, all we know is there's extensive damage up there, unfortunately, and we will reach out to them. Our plan after that is we'll talk to the individuals who have damaged or destroyed property. And after we've been able to make those notifications, we'll put out a really kind of an all message to the public, especially in the Poudre Canyon. We're not going to take the time to call people whose property wasn't damaged. The message essentially will be, if you were not contacted, your property's good. But we want to verify that before we make those contacts. Up in Monument Gulch, it's going to kind of depend on what we find up there as to how we make the close out to the public. But we definitely want to reach or make every effort to reach property owners before we go public with where those damaged or destroyed properties were.
Thank you, Sheriff. The next question we have is going to be for the Forest Service. This was in response to the initial attack to this fire. Why didn't the initial response to this fire put the fire out?
Sure. So I'll try to get this right. I think I know all the resources that were sent out, but when we got the smoke report up near Chambers Lake at Cameron Peak, a bunch of resources were initially deployed right away to go respond to that fire. So I'm going to try to get this right. 12 smoke jumpers, 2 heavy helicopters, 2 large air tankers, 3 engines, a squad, which is a group of 10, and a type 3 incident commander. So we did immediately mobilize a lot of resources out to the scene. In conditions like we had that day with heavy winds and the fire got moving very, very quickly, they were unable to use the air resources that they had. They were not able to execute any drops of water because the winds were super high and unstable. And that really contributed to the challenge of picking it up right there on the first day. In addition, we had some pretty significant public safety concerns nearby. It was very close to the Chambers Lake campground. So ensuring that folks got out of there safely, and I'm glad to say that they all did, also had to be a concern for the firefighters right when they got on scene. So it was a super challenging event, like right from the first minute. And once fire got established in that country, you know, if you've been watching these briefings, you know that the fuel conditions on that area carried it, and it moved very quickly. Became a really dangerous situation where the firefighters didn't have a good chance of success. So there definitely was heavy mobilization to get ahead of it, but they weren't able to catch it that first day.
Thank you. We're going to stay on the subject of response to wildfires. We've had several questions comparing the Cameron Peak fire response to the Bluestone fire that was near the Cameron Peak fire. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences and why that was able to be put out so quickly?
Question. The Bluestone fire, I will address because that was on private property, which made it a county fire. It went from the folks with Risk Canyon fire to the sheriff's office. And with that, there were two significant factors on that. One is the location. It was truly accessible. It was somewhere we could get crews hiked in. We weren't able to get them in the first night on the ground, but it was a very accessible area. We also were able to get aircraft off of the Cameron Peak fire. If those aircraft hadn't been there as quickly as they were, and there was a tremendous amount of tanker runs, those were brought over. And again, as was discussed earlier, a lot of those tankers weren't necessarily effective in the terrain up on Cameron Peak, but they were in the Bluestone, because the other thing that we had as a factor there is that was burning in the high, as discussed before, in the High Park burn scar. So we had we didn't have a lot of live timber. We had some up there, but it was a lot of grass and then some leftover standing trees and piled trees on the ground. So extremely different conditions. We were able to get to it much easier, and we had the assets off the major fire. Without the combination of those, that fire certainly would have taken off. So very different conditions on that.
Thank you, Sheriff. We have some questions about some of the work that's being done on the line today. The question is that they're not seeing a lot of firefighters out today, and why are you not engaging while the fire has cooled down?
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Everywhere that we can engage, we are engaging, and that's something that as the fire moved down into the areas that are more accessible to us, yeah, there's a few minutes that we're having to take, or a little bit of time that we're having to assess what our new strategy is going to be, because obviously the fire footprint has moved. However, we've got the resources, we feel like, to be aggressive in those areas that John talked about earlier. And as soon as it's safe to get firefighters in there, we're going to get them in there. And in some areas, they are already in there. And even the night of the run, firefighters were continuing to work late into the evening in and around the structures, and continue to work as it started. The snow was flying. There were still folks that were in there working throughout that time period. And we're going to take our shots at the areas that we can have high likelihood of success, and try to really get after those areas that John talked about earlier that are critical to us.
Thank you. Next question is going to be about the Buckhorn Road and 44H area. Can you tell me what's going on in that area? Has the fire gotten into that area, and what are we doing to protect Buckhorn?
Even after the snow was in there, we had folks that had UTVs that could get an eye on different areas. There was some, active fire in and around some of the structures. Firefighters were in there working that, and once again, John highlighted that a little bit ago in opening remarks. That's what we're going to focus on is that particular area, and try to get direct on the fire line, and minimize the spread, and utilize this weather and this break that we have to really make some hay on that area.
Thank you. Next question is going to be about local knowledge, working with the incident management teams. How is the local knowledge and local input provided to the incident management team? And how does the local resources work with the incident management teams?
I'll take a part of that, and Katie may add to that as well. At the county level, we've been involved, now the state is involved because of a delegation order. And we're at the table every morning in the discussions, and the critical piece is we're brought to talk about where the values are for us and talk strategy. So why the fire management team is looking at big picture, certainly one of them, the pieces that they do every day is take input from our staff as to any questions or concerns we have about areas that are being defended or being discussed. So I've been happy with the willingness to listen, and not just willingness, but the desire to make sure we're a part of that. So at that local level on structures and resources, et cetera, we have continued to be at the table and speaking up for the local residents and their properties.
Thank you. And on that note, do you guys feel that you've been successful with the fire so far?
I can take that. So that's a really tough question, and success is very subjective, right? And I don't think there is a black and white answer in something as complex as this about whether or not we've been successful. However, I can say that there have been a lot of successes with this incident. We haven't had a single fatality or serious injury of a firefighter or a member of the public. And that's the most critical value to us is people's lives. So in that way, we have been very successful, and I think the team has made good choices to protect human lives. We have lost some structures, as the sheriff mentioned. However, given the fire behavior that we were having over the weekend, it could have been a lot worse. And there was a ton of effort done, particularly in some of the areas where the fire was really moving quickly on the Highway 14 corridor, and some of those other places where it got really close to and into communities. There was a ton of work done to protect structures. So while we did have, and I can't ever negate the loss that some folks are going to feel over the next couple of days as they get news about their homes and the places that are really valuable to them. But there were a lot of things that the team has been able to protect. And so it's a mixed bag whether or not people feel like this was a success. But we do feel like that there have been a lot of successful elements to how this incident's been handled.
I'd like to say something on that too.
What she said is what I think about too, is somebody that's responsible for the individuals both in the air and on the ground and the communities that are at risk that we're trying to get out of the way. That is something that we focus on every day. And I was in Australia this year, December through January, and we were able to save a lot of wildlife. We were able to save a lot of homes on many of the fires that I was on in New South Wales. But we lost a firefighter and we lost 3 aviators. And that's not success. That's something that can never be replaced. I saw the young man that was there that is not going to be with his father. And so when we look at the tactics, we look at several things, and we've discussed them already, and I'll repeat it again. We look at our probability of success, and we look at the effort that's going to go into it and the risk that's going to be at the firefighters and to the public. And we weigh all that and we make those decisions, and some of them are very hard. And another personal note is I've got 2 daughters in fire, one that's on Las Vegas Hell Attack and one that's on Ruby Mountain Hot Shots. And I would hope that fire managers that are responsible for them when they are doing their best efforts to put the fire out would also make good, solid decisions on their safety. And I also say that on a day like the other day when it was running as hard as it was running, the sheriff's department had already pre-planned what it was going to look like if they had to get folks out of there for evacuation. That's success. The firefighters were being aggressive in those areas, in those homes that could be defended, and they were saving homes, and they were also keeping other firefighters safe. And that's what I call success.
Thank you, Chuck. Next question is going to go to the Forest Service. The 517 and I believe 172 roads had fuels work done years ago. Were these used during this fire?
That is a really good question. And I'm looking over at John because he's probably got the map better in his head. I don't want to give incorrect information. In general, I can say that we absolutely took existing fuels treatments and areas where we had thought about slowing and stopping the fire, and they are definitely built into the design of these lines. Our district staff that have worked on all these projects came out, hiked back and forth between Redfeather and the Raywas a couple times back and forth, helping them locate where existing projects had been put in place and where they could easily put those lines in with equipment to tie in work that had already been done. So I can't speak to the exact locations that you're mentioning because I don't want to get it incorrect, but absolutely existing work on the landscape has totally been utilized in the strategy of this fire.
And I'll address a portion of that
Also, when we talked earlier, the sheriff was talking about how we work hand in hand with the local individuals. That's the knowledge that we need as an incident management team to be successful. And that's exactly what we do, is we find out where those lines are, where those existing fuels treatments are. And it also goes back to our probability of success. If there's a lot of work that has already been done in there, we can add to that based on what we think the expected fire behavior is going to be. So we oftentimes try to utilize those lines to defend the values at risk. And existing highways, obviously some of the areas that we were trying to make a stand were at those highways that we'd improved the distance between the fuels. And as you can see by the run of the fire, some of those were ineffective. It wouldn't matter if it was an interstate. In some of those areas, it still would have been ineffective.
Thank you, Chuck. So our next questions are going to be for the South Zone and Rocky Mountain National Park. What is the risk to the interior of Rocky Mountain National Park, and do we expect closures in the park to expand?
Hi, everybody. Darla Seidels. I'm the superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park and the agency administrator on the fire for the South Zone. In terms of the values at risk here in the park, Brad mentioned that this is kind of stuck up against the alpine, and so that's not so much of an issue. There is a potential for the fire to move down this way, either straight towards Chapin Pass or off this way down to Poudre. Very unlikely because of the likelihood of the winds not being from the north. So it could come into here for sure, and that's what Brad was talking about, that if it does come into those places, we've got our management action points there that will help trigger actions that we take to do voluntary and mandatory evacuations. What was the second part of that question? Can you read it again, Don?
The closures of the park.
The park closures. Okay. So yes, we've had a couple of different closures, and right now, a lot of this northern area of the park is closed. We closed Old Fall River Road, leading up from the east entrance of the park, and we've also closed Trail Ridge Road. We expect to keep Old Fall River Road closed for the time being because it does help to provide access for firefighters and just other types of access that we need. Trail Ridge Road right now is actually closed primarily because of the snow and the icy conditions. Our crews have come from the east side and the west side to plow the road, and they've made it up to pretty high elevation, but they got 6-foot drifts in that area. So they've still got a chunk to clear tomorrow. The sunshine came out here today. It was quite beautiful and started to melt some of that snow, but it'll probably be a day or two before we can get the Trail Ridge Road open again. Again, all this area is still closed to overnight backcountry wilderness use. A couple of these areas, the Lumpy Ridge area, the Cow Creek area, and the Lawn Lake area is open to day use hiking only. and all of those wilderness sites are going to continue to be closed for the foreseeable future.
Next question is going to be about firefighting and firefighting tactics. If you can explain the difference between direct and indirect attack. We hear those words mentioned often.
Our preference when it's safe is to be aggressive and do direct attack, and when we think it's going to be effective. And so when firefighters are right on the line, digging hand line, separating the fuel that the fire can travel in, that's what we call a direct attack. Oftentimes, our hand crews are using that if it's in fuels where the engines can pump and roll and or just lay hose. That's also called a direct attack. An indirect attack would be when you can't do those things, you'll go back to a natural barrier, some area that will assist you in containing the fire, and you can burn off of those lines to make them wider, and that's what we call an indirect attack. And there are hazards that come with both of those and risks that come with both of those tactics. Obviously, when you're direct attack, you're right there. You need to make sure that you've got a good escape route and a safety zone to get to. If we have conditions that blow up or an unexpected wind event, snags, which is a huge problem right now with all the beetle kill. We have a lot of firefighters that are injured and killed with snags. And then in the indirect attack, there's dangers that come with that too. Anytime you are away from the fire, it has a chance to get a big head of steam and head your direction. And that's never ideal, but those are two of the tactics that we utilize, and there's risks and rewards with both of them.
Thank you, Chuck. And just an additional question on that. Can you explain what a snag is?
Yeah, so a snag is any tree that's fire weakened that could come down. But the obvious ones are the ones that are beetle kill or dead standing trees, that the root system and or the tree structure itself can be weakened. It could be weakened on the inside even before fire has touched it. Could be some decay in it where the tree can come over and strike a firefighter.
Thank you, Chuck. Next question is going to be for the sheriff. Are you reconsidering mandatory evacuations that are currently in place?
Thank you. Good question on evacuations. We reevaluate those each and every day. And I think a good example of that, as everyone's aware, over the weekend, we pulled a lot of evacuations. We implemented a lot. And in fact, on Monday, I'm sure for some folks, it may have been a little perplexing that we were very near what was projected to be cold and changing weather, and yet we were still pulling evacuations. And that was because at that point in time, we still had at least 3 or 4 or 5 hours of very significant wind events that could cause tremendous fire spotting. So we did a lot of them that night, more than anybody hoped to see. However, by the very next day, my staff working with the fire team made that an immediate reevaluation where we moved a lot of those mandatories, and good examples. Everything in the Risk Canyon area was removed completely. Glacier View, Redfeather, Crystal Lakes went to voluntary, and we totally lift them when we're very confident that's just not in the zone anymore. There's not an immediate threat, because we understand when we fully lift them, people will bring all their property back. They bring livestock. They bring things that are difficult to get in and out. However, when we get to the Glacier View, Crystal, and Redfeather, we know based on the fire conditions we talked about, that threat's not eliminated. It's definitely down for a few days, but there's a lot of potential if that fire gets up again to come across there at Pingree, or that thumb that's sticking up into that green line area. So in those, we evaluated and decided that best at this point was to move the mandatories back to voluntary and let people back into their property, but make sure they know I'd still keep livestock away from there. I would be ready at a few hours notice to be able to get out. So we're continuing to reevaluate those. The areas that continue to be of significant concern is everything in that upper Poudre Canyon. Obviously there was and still is active fire there, along with the things on Pingree Park Road for obvious reasons of the burn, and then back down County Road 44H or the Buckhorn, because there is active fire at the top and the potential for it to push down. People that know that area know there's a lot of fuel and there's a canyon for it to move down. So those are the main mandatories we have. And we will continue to move those because it's a priority for us. We understand the frustration and the inconvenience, and we want to eliminate that as soon as we safely can. The fire management team has been very well aware of that and very reactive and responsive with that as well.
Thank you, Sheriff. Next question is going to be for Katie at the Forest Service. What is it going to take to be able to open the forest back up?
So safe conditions is the first and foremost answer. And that can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean just places where fire is immediately active. A lot of our closures are put in place to allow folks to work in there and to allow engines and crews and heavy equipment to go in and out safely and not do that with the concern that they might hurt someone inadvertently. The kinds of things that we're looking for are where are we actively working? Where might the fire head, which is why the closures have gotten larger. The fire got a bit larger, so well, a lot larger. So the closures got larger to accommodate that. And then kind of where our focus area is, you know, as this fire, like with the snow, things are going to change. We don't know exactly what that will look like yet. We still have our focus areas, and we're going to keep those closed until we're sure that either folks are working out of there or the fire danger is past. So just having that set of conditions where everyone can use the area safely is what it will take to open things up. And we have closed things gradually. We've certainly tried to maintain as many recreation opportunities as we can. We definitely understand that there's some early hunting seasons and hunters that have been particularly impacted, as well as just folks that want to get out. Even on a snowy day, I think it's September, there probably would have been a lot of people up Poudre Canyon today, but it just wasn't safe to have folks up there. So once those conditions change, we'll address it area by area and try to provide those recreation opportunities again.
Thank you. Next question is going to be for our incident commander here in the North Zone. With just 4% containment unchanged after the snow, do we have enough resources to make sure the fire does not spread? Curious what federal assistance may be available in terms of funds, equipment, personnel, military crews, National Guards, etc.
Yeah, so I'll discuss several elements of that. And if I miss some of the questions or some of the elements to the question, please remind me. So the military is being mobilized. There's already one contingent that's mobilized and another one that they're planning on mobilizing. Once again, it comes down to priority and where exactly those military resources go. And right now they're not here. As far as the resources that we have, we feel pretty grateful that we have what we do have, and we have had to give up a couple of the aviation assets, but we've kept more of the effective ones. We feel that will be effective in this fuel type, especially our tanked heavy helicopters. So we have some resources that are timing out, but we plan on giving them some of that rest right now and bringing them back on the incident. And so as far as, once again, I'll go back to our tactics. We're going to need some mechanized equipment in some of the areas. We're going to need hand crews in some of the areas. We're going to need engines to continue to be engaged within the structures in those areas. And we have that right now. We don't have as much of everything as we would like to do that, in particular the hand crews and some of the leadership that it takes to deploy all of that effectively throughout the fire. But we're doing better than some areas in the country right now when it comes to the amount of resources that we have. So we'll use what we have as effectively as we can.
Thank you. Next question. Go with the question for the Forest Service. How do we expect the fire to affect drinking water supplies in northern Colorado?
We are already thinking about that. Obviously, the area that the fire has impacted is really, really critical for a number of communities in the area. So that's been a really important value that we've communicated to the team right from the beginning. There are already folks out there making assessments about what the burn conditions are, and then working with the water companies to work through what the potential impacts may be. I don't have a lot of information about answers on that yet, but I can tell you that they're working on it. And it is absolutely, we know, very, very critical to lots and lots of folks in this area to make sure that the water quality is excellent. It's something that so many people depend on.
Thank you. Next question is going to be for the sheriff. Do we have any idea when power may be restored to areas that had service shut off? And will property owners with affected property have to wait for mandatory evacuations to be lifted in order to return?
Well, let me address the evacuation part, and I might go back to Chuck on the power part there. Obviously, if something's in a mandatory zone, we are keeping those areas closed for obvious reasons. What they can look for is for those to either move back to voluntaries or to completely be lifted. And again, that's part of the conversation that we have, is really pushing to safely get areas repopulated. And we have that conversation with the fire managers. And as I'm pushing to say, I really want to make sure we get residents back in, I also have an obligation to listen to the folks, utility providers, and the fire folks as well, that they still have some active work. So that's a balance, but they also understand it's not that they have to be completely out of the area before folks come back in. That's certainly not the case. It's just a matter of that there's a safe time to make that transition. And I think if you witness how quickly we got a lot of folks back in after those evacuations over the weekend, that's a testament of their willingness to make sure. In fact, I know those conversations every day, that actually comes up from the team. We know we want to get people back in as soon as we safely can. So I know those things are moving forward, and maybe Chuck can address the things with utilities, because I'm not directly in communication with those folks.
So our liaisons work with the utility companies and with our operations folks to determine the safest time to get them in there to start evaluating the condition of the lines and whether those lines can be recharged, whether there's damage to the lines, if they can maybe isolate different sections. So we make evaluations on when they can get in there, and I can assure you that we're going to get the power companies in there to the areas that we know to be safe as quickly as possible, and it'll be up to them to evaluate the condition of their line and whether, if they flip the switch to turn it back on, whether it's going to stay on or it's going to cause more problems. So, but yeah, we're working with them, and they will be evaluating their infrastructure.
Thank you. Next question for the U.S. Forest Service. Can you give us the status of the investigation?
The cause of the fire has not yet been determined, but there is an investigation team that has been working on it. And I know that they have been up to the origin of the fire, but we've not released that information yet.
Thank you. So it sounds like we got connection back with the South Zone. So we'll ask that question again. What is the probability of fire threatening Estes Park and the probable chance for evacuations?
Okay, so actually I'll just sit. So the probability for it to actually impact Estes Park is, I don't want to say it's low, and I don't want to say it's high, and I don't want to say it's moderate. I would put it between moderate and low. So basically, a lot of things depend on how the next few days go, especially with areas up in the north, how they can get around those areas, how successful those conditions are and how it happens. And then as well as how the fire activity goes through the Chapin Creek out there. And basically that's continuous fuel that goes from Chapin Creek down to Fall River. And that's gonna take a lot of, I wanna say, jumping jacks and hopscotch for the fire to actually get on down there and align up with the winds to really go through those canyons to approach Estes Park. So, you know, it's going to be low to moderate, and basically it's going to take a lot of lucky wind alignment on the fire's part to actually make it there through that end. So, yeah, it has the west side potential, low to moderate, and the north side a potential low to moderate, depending on the successful of the firefighters up there.
Thank you for that. Next question is going to be about the High Park fire, and this is going to be for Incident Commander Chuck Russell. During the High Park fire, there appeared to be greater use of water and retardant drops. Is there a reason those options don't appear to be readily used for the Cameron Peak fire?
I was an incident commander in this geographic area. I'm very familiar with the High Park fire, probably not near as familiar as the sheriff, but I can talk a little bit about the High Park fire. One started in May, and so it was early season. There wasn't a lot of competition for resources, both aviation and ground resources. On the fuel type, it did start in the lodgepole pine, same fuel type as what we are here, but it transitioned into the ponderosa pine and with the grass understory, which is very effective. Retardant is very effective in those areas. Once again, I think you heard John talk about the effectiveness of retardant in the closed canopies. Doesn't get down to where it needs to be, so fire spread continues to happen. In the ponderosa pine, it's more open canopy with that grass bed. The retardant's able to get down there and be more effective. And once again, it depends on the wind conditions for the safety of our aviators. So we are going to utilize retardant when we know it's going to be effective. It's one of the tools in the toolbox that we have. We're going to use our helicopters and have been using our helicopters when we know they're going to be effective, and we can follow that up with the ground resources. And that's a key part. We can put a lot of retardant on the ground, but if we don't follow that up with firefighters on the ground or other resources, it's ultimately going to creep through there, and it's going to be black all the way around it, and we've wasted a large amount of money and risk to our aviators, for nothing, essentially, at that point. So those are still tools that we have. Those are tools that we'll continue to utilize. I know at the beginning parts of this fire, there was 5 retardant drops that took place with one of the incident management teams, and one of them was effective. Once again, that's something that we look at and will utilize as needed.
Thank you. And I have another question for you here, Chuck. Is there reason for concern with the growth of the fire to the east? And this is in reference to resources being shifted to address the part in Pingree Park. Is there cause for concern for the folks on Highway 14, Redfeather Lakes, Crystal Lakes, and Glacier View?
That's always a concern for us. Until we get some containment line in on that east and north side, that's going to be a concern. And there's a lot of work to do. It was mentioned that this is now, the 4th, I think, largest fire in Colorado history. So there's a lot of open line on the ground, and this snow has given us the respite for us to be able to get aggressive and get folks into a lot of those areas. But there are some areas that we still have a lot of concern of how exactly we're going to tackle the fire in those areas. Some of that high elevation stuff, we're hoping that the snow stays on a lot longer and buys more time so that we can get containment lines into those areas that are more critical. And but those areas are still a concern to us, and as are many areas on the fire, but it's something that we're still looking at, and we're trying to address as quickly as we can.
Okay, we have one more question for you. And this is talking about the High Park again. Will the High Park burn help? We keep hearing about this, but don't understand. What is the expected progression of the fire, and what do computer models say?
Thank you for that question. And it's a good question. So in 2012 is when the High Park fire happened. And so it reduced a large amount of fuel, trees, grass, brush, but mainly the tree component. It reduced the flammability in that area. And so it changed the fuel regime from a heavy, dense fuel loading to a lighter fuel loading. And we did. We got quite a bit of spots. And when it came across the road, it slopped, what we called slopped, or moved into the High Park area. But in those lighter fuels, it slowed down. The fire intensity slowed down. And as soon as we got that moisture on it, those lighter fuels are easier to go out. It's like putting out a campfire versus a piece of paper. It's night and day as far as how effective the moisture is in the fire scar of the High Park fire. So it was great that a bulk of the fire, when it made its run, went into the High Park burn.
Thank you, Chuck. This question is going to go to the sheriff. With the evacuation orders becoming expensive for those who are evacuated, who will incur the residents' evacuation costs, and what resources do you recommend to help with those expenses?
So when it comes to the evacuations, we work that through county emergency management, through the Emergency Operations Center, and they have the resources like the American Red Cross, and they can refer individuals to what resources are available out there to assist them with housing and with some of those expenses. And it can also help individuals if they have insurance coverage. One of the things they do is have individuals who can help explain how insurance might be able to help. So those are the basic resources. And again, that's one of the reasons that we work to get people back in as soon as we possibly can and do it safely. We recognize that expenses are incurred by those individuals.
Thank you, Sheriff. So I think this is going to be our last question. Looking at the 5-day wind forecast, the wind is supposed to swing to the north. Are you moving personnel to the south in expectation of that?
So we feel like we have, the next 4 or 5 days, we've got a lasting effect from this snow. And even as it melts and comes off, that moisture is there. So this wind that is coming up, we're not too concerned about. The areas that we've talked about that are our priority are the areas that we're going to continue to focus on, continue to be as aggressive as possible in those areas, and be prepared to any flare-ups or areas that may start to poke up as it dries out and as the wind starts to expose where they're at. We'll be prepared to get both aviation, aircraft, aviation assets, and our ground resources to those areas.
And that wraps up our question and answer for this evening. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight and for putting comments in the questions in the comment section. We'll get back to some of those questions that weren't answered tonight. We'll find those answers and we'll get them to you. I would like to thank all of our folks, both on the North Zone and the South Zone here, for taking the time tonight to answer questions. Thank you.